religion has many victims, and these are the stories of how they survived. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Awakening, the space where we talk about faith, freedom, and finding ourselves beyond the walls of religion. I'm Heather.
And I'm Tamara. We're so glad you're here today because, woo, this conversation is going to be a good one.
Oh, definitely. Today we're diving into a story that so many people can relate to. That moment when faith and politics collided and everything started to unravel.
Yeah, our guest today is a licensed therapist who grew up in Christianity. But after the 2016 elections, when Trump first came into the scene, everything shifted.
And I think that's such an important time to look back on because a lot of people started questioning what they believed, not just politically, but spiritually too.
Exactly. What happens when the faith you thought was about love and compassion starts looking a whole lot more like control and nationalism?
That's what we're unpacking today. Now, today, we are sitting down with someone whose story is incredibly powerful. But I want to mention something really quick before we get started. You'll notice that his speech sounds a little different, and that's because Will lives with a disability that affects how he speaks. We just wanted to share that up front so you can settle in and really focus on his incredible insight and the wisdom that he brings to this conversation. So pull up a chair, grab your coffee, and join us as we welcome Will to the table. This morning, we are so grateful to have an incredible guest. His name is Will. He is a therapist and he has deconstructed from the Christian faith. So, welcome into our show today, Will.
Thank you so much for
Welcome.
having me. Thank you.
So, Will, you deconstructed from religion, and I just want to have you share with our listeners a little bit about your background and what led you to start deconstructing your faith.
Yeah. Oh, that's a loaded question. Um, I grew up in rural South Carolina. And when I mean rural, I mean like super small town, maybe 1,000 people. And so several factors were at play here. One, I grew up in a microcosm of everyone that kind of thought the way I did. So I grew up in a small rural SBC church, and in that church, I was in church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, the Bible, youth event. The doors are open, we are always there. And the other factor in this is that I was born with a rare disability called Mobius syndrome, which most have never heard of. And the way Mobius works is that it affects the nerves and networks that did not develop in utero. So I do not have the ability to make any facial expressions, smile, frown, anything of that sort of nature. I've had about 19 different surgeries in the span of 44 years. And growing up, I never ever thought of anything besides the faith I grew up in. Like it was so ingrained in me, it was my whole life. And not saying my whole life, it was my whole life. All my social circle, everything revolved around church. I graduated from a Christian high school, went to Catholic college, got my 4 year degree in youth ministry, and then again, I was still in that bubble until my mid
Yeah.
20s. I think the first crack in my foundation was when I graduated Bible college. I wanted to be a youth pastor. And I've always had a heart for other cultures. I've always loved other cultures. And so I had the opportunity, I had the opportunity to interview with this organization that trained youth pastors internationally. So I went in for the interview, and that interview went okay. Went in for a second interview, which is like when the church had, that interview went okay. But I didn't hear back in a couple of weeks. So I called them back and I said, "So what's going on?" And they said, "Well, we don't think this is the best spot for you because we don't think people can understand you." Now, I understand the Irish speech issue. I understand that I can be hard to understand. However, I will say that most people who do or who are around me for a certain amount of time, it becomes easier. And I do tend to talk rather fast when I get excited. Um, they said, we think you need to do a youth internship. And again, because I was so naive, because I never ever doubted anyone, I thought everyone had the best intentions, you know. They're
Yeah.
Christians, they had the best intentions, absolutely. So I applied for an internship, moved out to Colorado for a year-long internship in the church out there. And I was out there about 3 months when I was called into the office one day. They're like, you know, this isn't going to work out. Now, I would tell you that that was my first time living away from home. I grew up pretty sheltered. And so I understood some of the concerns they had. However, from the moment I stepped foot in that church, I was always compared to the last youth intern they had. They loved this past intern.
Yeah.
So I never quite lived up to his status, I guess. And so when I left with more questions than answers. And so I moved back to South Carolina, went through a really long, dark depression. Make a long story short, I ended up moving to Michigan, married my wife in 2006. And eventually I would end up going into social work about 10, 15 years later. But what really what really made the foundation crumble was several things. When I say crumble, I mean this foundation I had for decades, it just absolutely crumbled. One was the election of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Now I voted for Trump in 16. I did. And we can get into this more if you want. And the reason I did was because I was always taught that to be Christian was to vote Republican. So
Yeah.
I did that. I voted Republican, and I never questioned it until Trump was elected, and I saw his reprehensible moral character, and I thought, how can Christians support this?
Yeah.
How this doesn't add up? And then the second thing within that was the death of George Floyd. When George Floyd was killed, I was still in grad school. I was really just learning about police brutality, what that looked like.
Yeah.
And I ended up calling a friend. And I said, "Look," I said, "Is this reality? This happens?" She goes, "Well, it happens all the time." Again, in the world I grew up in, that never happened because
Yeah.
I
We
was,
didn't hear about it.
sheltered.
You don't, yeah.
So no, not
It does in Detroit.
those are the things. After that kind of fell down, everything else was kind of. So I started questioning everything else.
So, how did the people around you and in your life at that time responded when you started to deconstruct?
So I was in a unique place because I've been out of the South for so long that where most of the people I knew were mainly acquaintances at that point. Um, I did have a couple of family friends I was close to, I kept in contact with. I would say that I got a lot of pushback. So I'm kind of looking a lot more vocal on Facebook. And before that, I wasn't vocal at all. I never posted anything controversial. And I remember I posted something. I said, Trump wants to make America great again, but when has America ever been great for everybody? And when I
Amen.
posted that question, I had probably 3 people I knew who know how I know for decades just blocked me like that. And there was no contact after that. It
Yeah.
was just boom, we're done. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, what? Literally, I'm like, and so that door just kept on opening. Um, I would say that for those that know me, I wasn't really in. What was that? So I wasn't really. Even though we were in a church, I kept a lot of my thoughts secrets to the people around me. So I didn't let my wife know I was deconstructing probably 2 weeks later. Um, but I will say that for those who knew me, a lot of them just assumed that I was walking away from their faith and never asked me the questions. It was always like,
No.
you're this, you're that. There was no questions whatsoever. Like, none. None.
Yep. It was the same way with me. There were no questions. They didn't ask questions. It was just like, she's crazy. We're going to block her. We're done with her,
Mhm.
right? Like, we can't listen to
Well,
her. She's a heretic or whatever. They just write you off.
and the thing I go back to with that is because people don't realize. I mean, dude, this was my life for 3 decades.
Yeah.
I was as committed as a Christian as they could. I did my devotions. I was like, I could not have believed any harder.
Yep.
And so the time I walking away from the faith, you just don't get it. You really
No.
just don't get it. Nor do you want to get it.
And, when they say that, they are literally invalidating all of our life experiences, all the knowledge that we've gained, all the,
Mhm.
things that we have actually lived through and processed and wrestled with. And that's not even fair for them to do that to us when they've never even stepped a foot in our shoes, you know?
Right.
Absolutely.
What was the hardest part of letting go your version of Christianity that you grew up with? Looking back, was it relationships, beliefs, identity? And what helped you move through that grief process? Because I think sometimes a lot of people miss the fact that we just think, oh, we're so glad we're free, but we miss that
Yeah,
fact of grief.
that is a great question. And I would say that honestly, all three of those relationships, identity, purpose, I think for me, it was my whole world. So when I deconstructed, I lost everything. I literally lost everything. Identity especially because I think growing up what I did, I always taught to die to self, right? Die to self, die to self, die to self. So I didn't know who I was, so no clue who I was. So when I started walking away, and I tell people all the time, like it was and it is, deconstruction is probably the most brutal thing a person can go through. One of the most brutal things someone can go through. So when I started deconstructing, everything around me just collapsed. And and even now, like how describe it now, it's lonely. It is incredibly lonely. It is the most isolating thing that anyone can ever experience because all the people you once knew who loved you and validated you, they're just gone. They're gone.
Yeah.
And then the ones you do know, they think you're some, you know, misguided person because you walk away from their faith and they don't care to get it. So it's not like, hey, Will, you're deconstructing, but what happened? Why? None of that. And
Yeah.
and and not to your point, I can't tell you how many messages I got from people I hadn't talked to in years go, are you even a Christian anymore? Or someone said, hey, you know, Holy Night Church, not Pastor preaches the truth. I'm like, what the hell? No, there was no, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
And
No, if I can just say this, that is why it's so important for people who are deconstructing. And I may say this every time we are on a Zoom, but we are harmed within the context of relationships and we are healed within the context of a relationship. It is so
yeah,
important when we are deconstructing our foundation that we find groups and like-minded people to be able to relate to and to just eat dinner with, just break bread with, just do something with. Wink, wink, Michigan atheist.
well, and I'll say this. I think for me, I'm a very social person. So for me,
Mhm.
deconstruction led me into a dark depression, and it wasn't because of my belief. It's because I was isolated, and I'm still isolated. Like I live in a city of 100,000 people, and I have like no close friends. And it's like, well, you said
Yeah.
choose not friends. Like where are they at? Like I mean, where do you find people when you leave the church? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no clue where to meet people anymore. Like I honestly think like the whole idea of closest with friends after you're over 30, I don't know how to find that. And I was talking to my wife about it recently. I said, I don't know how to find friends anymore because the people I knew just walked away. And they're right. You can't do this alone, nor should you,
Yeah.
but people don't know where to turn to.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to make sure that people hear and understand our stories because the loneliness that comes along with it. When I first started my deconstruction 27 years ago, there was not social
No.
media. I didn't even know there was such a word as deconstruction. When I realized that this is what I was going through, it opened a brand new world for me. And it absolutely made me push myself outside my box, which I defined with Christianity and patriarchy. So when I started stepping outside that box, even if it was like a toe at a time, right? It was like little teeny tiny steps. And then I would run back into my patriarchy
Yeah,
little box, right?
yeah,
Even though I didn't go to church and even
yeah,
though I didn't believe and even though I was, back then a secular humanist, right? I still found that need to go back to what was safe. And
yeah.
as time has gone on and as time has evolved, you're able to step out of that when you realize that community is so important to healing.
It is.
So, Will, You deconstructed, you became a therapist. So I want to know, how has your own deconstruction shaped the kind of therapist you are today?
I think that let me back up for a minute. So after college, I spent when I moved here to Michigan, I spent about 10 years working as a housekeeper in a retirement home, then Sam's Club. And so I went from being in Bible college to thinking I was going to get this very nice, high paying job in the church and have status, quote. So working in a house as a housekeeper, scrubbing toilets every single day. And I, I hated the job when I was in it. Like I literally hated it because I thought I'm better than this. Why am I here? But within the span of time I was there, I think that my shift started to change where I really began to see people as they are. And I was working with people who would work 2 or 3 jobs a day, just to make ends meet. And these were hard working people. And so I think that really shattered everything I thought I knew about how people functioned, about how life works. And when I became a therapist, it was literally after my wife and I spent several years to give our kids, who at that point had a lot of medical needs. So we were in and out of the hospitals and therapy and um, appointments, procedures, all these things. Probably could have spent a good, 10 years or so with that, which is what led me into social work. And so I think all of that combined has really helped me to be a therapist that the biggest focus on being a therapist isn't the techniques. I think there's too much focus on that sometimes. I think it's really letting my clients know this is a safe space for you. That here
Yeah.
you're safe. Here you can be the person you want to be. Here you can share what you want to share. And I'm not going to try to fix you. My goal is to walk with you, help you the tools you might need. But it really is a space where you're going to find empathy, you're going to find compassion, and you're going to find um, someone who doesn't have all the answers, but they want to. But someone just to really learn how to listen to you and value you and validate you. So I think that those experiences really help me see that life is never, ever, ever what we think it's going to be. Like it's always something different. And so part of our life is always having to adjust to what happens. I remember the night that my daughter came home from the hospital, we had no clue that she was going with a prep pilot. We went into the hospital that day, just excited to have our first daughter and thinking nothing about what might happen after that. She's going with the prep pilot. And so spent 3 weeks in the field. And in that span of hours, our world completely changed. And I couldn't go back to what it was before. I had to adapt. So it's really helping people see, that life is always changing, it's evolving.
Yeah,
But what matters the most is how we respond to those changes that take place.
absolutely.
That is so true. That is so true. From your professional perspective, what are some common wounds you see in people coming out of high controlled or faith-based environments? And what misconceptions do people often have about what healing actually looks like?
I think a common misconception with a lot of people is it's the idea of never being able to process what you're going through. I think for a lot of us who kind of
So
high
true.
control religions, it's always taught praise God, praise God, praise God, praise God. We'll
Spiritually
never be able
bypass this, spiritually bypass
that.
that.
That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, I'm like what word
I'm
is that? I know the word.
blessed.
I know it. I know it. Yes, and so spiritual bypassing is probably one of the most dangerous things ever, and I see it all the time. Because I'll give you an example. So when I was growing up, you know, I wanted disability, and so I was always taught glorify God, glorify God, glorify God, and I spent, I would go to certain days and testimony in other churches, and it wasn't until years later that I realized I was really messed up. And it's not that I didn't like doing those things. I did because at that point I did believe that God knew me how I was, and I still believe that to a certain extent. But I think I was never able to process the anger and frustration and sadness I have of not being of being different.
Yeah.
Like for
Yes.
example, I can't make facial expressions. I have people look at me. I used to, I hearing issues. So all these things that are related to my disability that there's things I'm like, no, I don't like this. I don't, I'm confident who I am, yes, but of course I would rather smile or talk to her. Who wouldn't, right? But I didn't find the words to that to years later. And so I see a lot of people who not only deal with spiritual bypass, but they never find their duty. They grow up and regardless of what their family's like, they're never able to differentiate themselves from their families. So they now years later they're like, well, I don't know who I am. It's another common thing to deal with. So healing,
Yes.
think about healing. Healing is not linear. So healing is not a straight path. Sometimes it's taking a step forward, taking 5 steps back. But healing, we can never really learn how to heal until we're able to be honest with ourselves, until we're able
Amen.
to be honest
Absolutely.
with who we are.
And Will, just to follow up on that, I have often said, because I've been in EMDR therapy now for about 6 months, and my
Mm-hmm.
therapist said to me last week, she said, "Do you know you have been with me once a week for 6 months, and I have not yet seen you angry about anything that has happened to you?" And I looked at her, I'm like, it's not because I'm not angry. It's because I'm afraid that if I release that anger, it'll be a monster that I'm not able to contain or know what to do with those feelings. And she was like, what does anger mean to you? And what people don't understand, I think sometimes it gets lost, is that those of us that have been raised in church houses, right? Those four walls, we are taught not to be angry. We are taught to always forgive. We're taught to always to be blessed and to make sure we show kindness to those who do things against us to harm us. And instead of allowing ourselves to understand and articulate into language our feelings, the only thing we have to go by is those raw feelings. We don't have words for those feelings because we were
Yes.
not taught that anger is a feeling and it's okay to have those. You know what I'm saying? We don't live our lives by it. We understand the difference. But frustration, disappointment, disbelief, any of those words become very foreign to me as a woman and how I'm to articulate how it is that I feel. And it's very important, I think, with you saying that and pointing that out, is because we are taught to feel. We are not taught to communicate and to articulate what it is we are feeling.
Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were raised as robots. We just were taught how to act and how to, and that really gets into how you parent. And my oldest is now 17, and I think part of the journey for me has realizing that for years I didn't know how to parent my kids and being afraid of their hard emotions, being afraid of their
Yeah.
anger, being afraid of their, meltdowns or whatever it might be, and learning how to have space for those now, um, and not beating myself up for what I didn't know back
Mhm.
then. I'm reading a book right now called The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, and it's a phenomenal book. But one of the things I like about the book is that it really talks about how a lot of how we were taught to be as parents was based on a lie. A
Yeah.
lie that if you raise your kids this way, they will do A, B, and C, right? So, and that's not how life works.
Yeah.
Um, if I raised, and I would say that as a young parent back then, there was so much pressure on me to be this kind of parent. And I knew I could never live up to that. I knew I could never live up to that. So that was a shame. And, like, oddly enough, I never knew how to talk with my kids about faith. And I don't really know why. I think because for me, even then, it felt like an awkward thing. Like, I'm not raising my kids to be like me. want to raise my kids to be their independent selves. Like I told my
Yes.
son, like I don't care what you believe. I don't care. I listen. All I want you to do is love people, and treat them kindly. That's the most important thing.
Yes.
And love yourself. Like that's the most important thing. Um, and I think this other misconception we have, and maybe we'll get into this later or not, but I think we have this conception that to raise kids in a Christian environment means that we have this idea that Christians are more moral,
Mm-hmm.
that a person of faith has more morality than someone who's quote unquote the atheist wink wink.
Yes.
And that's ingrained in us. We can't comprehend how, oh my gosh, that's an atheist have morals, that's an agnostic have morals.
Uh-huh.
And that's a heavy weight to carry.
Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
because, in these religious structures, you were taught that, anybody who is a non-believer or, Satanist, atheist, whatever, they're all going to hell in a handbasket,
Mm-hmm.
We're not even supposed to be in community with these people because we're not supposed to be unequally yoked with people. And you can't even help your neighbor or love your neighbor if you're not even willing to approach them or you're so afraid of them because you're afraid that they
Right.
have a demon or something, Because that's another thing that they told us is that, these people are demonic and their evil spirits could attach to you. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of messaging is that? Like, that is completely divisive messaging because it's already telling you, hey, those people are no good. You're already writing them off and you don't even know who they are. You don't know anything about them. All you know is that
Yeah.
they're an atheist or a Satanist?
One of the things that's really hard for me to grapple with is my mom and my stepdad when I was about 8 or 9, and my stepdad had a lot of issues. He was abusive, verbally abusive, he was an alcoholic. But I remember in college writing a letter, and all it was you need to get the right to Jesus. And he died about 5 years ago, and I think, what would it have been like if I would have sat down with him and said, hey, what's your story? You know, now granted, there was a lot of distance between us, and I'm not covering up the abuse at all. That is something I'm still dealing with. But I wonder if, as I got to adulthood, if I would have been able to approach that differently, if we would have been able to sometimes heal those wounds that were there. But I
Yeah.
didn't know how to do that when I was a kid. He didn't know how to do that either. So he's coming home every night, an alcoholic and a rage, totally abusive. But I realized later, in fact, his sister told us when he was dying, she said, my parents never told us that they love us. Oh my
Wow.
gosh. Oh my gosh. And again, that doesn't excuse any of the harm he caused, not at all. But
Yeah.
but in my mind, what did I do was the believer.
Mhm.
Because that's no most important thing in the chain, and it wasn't. This guy didn't know how to love at
Yeah.
all.
What does spirituality look like for you now? Are there practices, moments that still feel sacred? And how do you define faith these days?
I'm not sure I know how to define faith anymore. I would say, I would say
That's an
that as far as
honest
spirit,
answer.
I
I don't
would say
know.
I
Listen,
don't
I
know.
don't know half the time either, and I'm a reverend.
You know, I'll say that honestly, I think that I love the word spirituality because I think it encompasses a lot of things. Like for me, spirituality is it could be enjoying the sunrise as I drive to work. Spirituality could be enjoying the laughter of my kid. It could be a meditation at noontime. It could be a cup of coffee in the morning. Those things can all be spiritual in their own right. So I think spirituality for me is learning how to see the value and meaning in every single day. It's learning how to show up, to be present, and really learn how to love people authentically. Um, but that looks so different all the time. So I don't know if there's any practice I have, ingrained all together. I don't pray anymore. I haven't prayed in probably 2 or 3 years. I don't know how to pray anymore. It all sounds so
Foreign.
fake to me. Yeah, foreign, exactly. Now I will say that because I was raised SBC and not, the hierarchies of the Episcopal or Catholic, they had those prayers, those prayers that are kind of like written, that they go to. And I wonder those guys I think are beautiful because they've been around for so long,
Yeah.
But to go and pray, well, well, God did the clapping clap today, or God did this, or God did that, but the child down the streets dying of cancer. I mean, I don't know how to rectify that or justify that. So I think prayer for me is more a form of self-reflection. So if I do pray, when I pray, it's more what am I learning from this? Like, not I'm not trying to change God's mind to grab God's hand. It's
Yes.
more like help remind me of who I am, remind me
Yes.
of things I need to change, remind me of things I need to do. It's like journaling, it's like meditation. It's like it's not trying to fight the hands of God, you know. I never the word girl knows it push, pray until something happens. I mean, like, so but as far as but I'll say this too, when it comes to faith, this is something that I don't really share this openly. So there goes, and I'm ready for it. But here's my thing: I don't think that Jesus is the only way to heaven. I think, and I don't think believing that discredits not someone's faith at all. It doesn't. But I
Yeah.
think when I look at my Hindu friends, and my Muslim friends who truly love other people, how am I going to say you're going to quote unquote hell because you don't believe like I was taught, mind your way. But yeah, you love people, but you don't have the right beliefs. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't know what happens in the end, but I I have to believe that if there is a higher power, if there's a faith of some sort, if there is God, then all every one of us is going to be reconciled in a certain way. Like because I can't say that I have the truth, but yet my friend who's Muslim doesn't have the truth. Let me tell you a story. And this was probably the most greatest acts of love I've ever experienced in me. One of our friends who used to be a caregiver for our son, um, is Muslim. Now, as you know, living in Detroit, we have a large area population here in this area, and it was during Ramadan, and I told him, I said, hey, I'd love you to help me slaughter for us one day. And he said, let's go get it. I'm like, but it's Ramadan. You're not going to eat it all throughout the day. Let's go. I'm like, okay. Got in the car, drove down to Dearborn. Everyone is doing, their shopping for, their nightly meal. And he came home and he cooked this food for us, even though he could not have to do it. That was the most selfless act of
That is
love
so
I've ever
precious.
experienced. So, like, but you're telling me that he's quote unquote not saved, he's going to hell. And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, I don't know. Like, I don't know what happens in the life.
Yeah.
Um, now, do I still believe in Jesus? Yes. I would say I'm more agnostic than anything else, but to me, the Sermon on the Mount is one of the most beautiful things in the world. I think the Sermon on the Mount is just a beautiful display of how we need to live our lives. And
Yes.
it's beautiful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I cannot ignore that. But you know, I don't know if Jesus was even trying for us to make him as, as a God, or trying to make us as this one way to heaven. I mean, now I know people might listen to this and go, well, what are you doing? But I think a lot of people think this way, and just don't, they never talk about it. I would bet that a lot of people think like this. They're just afraid to talk about it, right?
They're afraid to talk about it. It really is because I can remember many years ago being fully entrenched in evangelical Christianity. I'm in it, and having those hard questions about, if God is so good, then what about these people on this remote island that have never met the Lord before, right? And we're supposed to say, oh, well, that's their fault. That's their fault. They didn't get saved. The right missionary didn't just so happen to land on that weird island. Even though I now know that there are islands that if a person steps foot upon there and you look like me, you're going to be unalived immediately, right? Because
Mhm.
they don't take foreigners, like they don't let them even step foot on their land. So when I think of stuff like that, and they already have their own spiritual practices and their own culture, those people are already connecting with God. They're just connecting with God in a
Yeah.
different way. And that's one thing that I hate
Mhm.
about westernized Christianity, because it tells you there's only one way to do it. When Buddhists are doing it, they're
Yeah.
connecting with God. Muslims are connecting with God. Witches are connecting
Yes.
with God. We're all connecting with God on a different level, and we're just
What?
doing it in different ways. So instead of shaming the spiritual practices of others, what if we started, engaging in curiosity and asking
And
them
Yeah.
embracing
questions?
them.
Yes, and learning more about their
Yes.
culture and their heritage instead of shaming all these things. And that's one thing that I love about my faith, is that we don't shame people's cultural heritage. If you have
Right.
voodoo in your heritage, then that's part of your faith. That's what your faith was built upon. I'm not going to shame you for
Yeah.
engaging in your cultural heritage or your spiritual heritage. The church robbed a
Mm.
lot of that from us. So much of our spiritual heritage has been robbed by westernized patriarchal Christianity. And it's
Well, if
crazy.
people would say, I hear people say all the time, well, if that's the case, then what's the point of being a Christian? Like, that is the most stupid, logical thing you could ever say. Like, if anything, I think believing that other things could be just as valid as yours makes your faith even more beautiful because you're able to appreciate the faith other people have. Like, I don't know if you, but like, if I believe that a Buddhist can attain the afterlife or Muslim, it doesn't take away from my
Yeah.
life if I believe in Jesus. So it really does. It makes it more beautiful. I mean,
Yep.
but I will say that the most beautiful thing about deconstruction, for me, the most beautiful thing is the ability to be able to appreciate people for who they are. Like, I know I don't have this guilt anymore about trying to convert people to
Yes.
Christianity. Like, I could talk to my Muslim friends, my Hindu friends, my Buddhist friends, like people who are atheists, and really come at it as curiosity. Say, hey, look, I honestly know, like, how does this work for you? That's awesome. Like, there's a lot of beauty in that. And I think for a long time it was really hard to open up to that. But like, you know, I, there's there's atheists who have no love in their heart for people than quote unquote Christians do. So um, I think deconstruction has allowed me to really learn how to love people. If people will say, well, you know, you're not who I once knew when you were 12, or you're not this person I knew years ago. But the will that I am now, in my opinion, is a lot better will than the will that I knew
Yes.
5 years ago.
Same, 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 honey. I was trash when I was a Christian. I was self centered. I was focused on me, myself, and I. That was it.
And
And I didn't
and
care
I say
about your
this,
needs or the needs of my neighbors.
Yeah,
right? And also I am a better Christian now as a devout atheist, if I can
yeah,
use these two words, than I ever was as a Christian, because everybody in my Christian walk of life had a label. And
mhm,
now, as an atheist, I step outside of everybody's label and meet that person where they're at and accept them for just exactly who they are, instead of getting caught up in what denomination, what marginal group they
Yes,
belong to, who do they look like? Do they look like
mhm,
me? Do they talk like me? Do they act like me? I
exactly.
must have the one and only true God and loving Savior, So I realized that becoming who I am today
mhm.
made me a better person because I no longer stand by the labels that Christianity boxed me into.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, Will, you've deconstructed, and I just want to ask you, you talk to a lot of people on the internet about deconstruction as well. So, how do you help people like rebuild trust in themselves and others, or even in the idea of faith after deconstruction? Is there a piece of wisdom or a practice that you personally return to keep yourself grounded?
Several months ago, this past summer, I was in a car accident, and I remember when I was deeply evangelical, I remember that everything happened for a reason, right? Everything had a purpose and meaning. It just happened, and was I trusting God? Was I not trusting God? Was I doing this? And I remember when that accident happened, for the first time in my life, I was able to say, sometimes life just happens.
Yes.
And I think that that was a
And it
lot
doesn't
easier for
happen because God ordained
right,
it.
right. It just is. You know,
Right.
when I was in so in therapy, I said, well, how can someone who's going through cancer, how can they go to that? They're not trusting God. I think it's easier to go to that as a non-example than an example because I know that nothing's tied to something I didn't do or did do or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing you have to do people who are deconstructing, I think it's almost like in nature. So you take the red pill, the blue pill. So and I'm not a deconstruction coach or anything like that. Like I love. Honestly, if I could ever go in a therapy practice around this, it's my dream really. I would love to go in a therapy practice around the idea of work with people who are deconstructing things. Like
Yes.
what does it look like? What does it look like now that I deconstruct that thing? How do I find out who I am? Right.
Yeah.
Um, I think the first thing I tell people is that one, you're not alone. This isn't. You're not the first person to look at one morning and go, "Oh, I'm losing my faith. There's something must be wrong with me." I think, and I think the second thing is really helping people understand that there's nothing wrong with who they are as a person. Right? This isn't some defect you have. This is you growing. This is you actually becoming a better version of yourself. Right?
Yes.
Um,
It's
so
you
what does it
becoming
look like?
your own person outside of how the institution defined you or defined life for you.
Right, right. Yeah, and so what does that look like, right? So I think I go in the next couple of years, and I have to have the resources to kind of do this, but I really want to write a book on what does it look like to help someone who's deconstructing. There's a lot of deconstruction books out there, so I don't want to just add another book. But I really would like to go on how do we find out who we are as a person, because again, a, a lot of people just spend their whole life, right? So first of all, you let them know you're not alone. I think second of all, you walk with them with their questions, their confusion, and you let them be where they are. Like there's no certain path, there's no milestone on this journey. It's not like, oh, you have to be here today, here tomorrow, day next week. No, it's like where you are right now in your life, that is okay.
Yes.
One of the
Right.
best books I've ever read in my entire life, and is a guy named Irvin Yalom. I wrote a book called Staring at the Sun. Irvin Yalom is a Jewish atheist. Um, but this book was the most beautiful book I've ever read. And he believes, at the end of life just ends. Now, I'm not at that point yet, because I still can't let go of the idea that it just ends. But he writes that book with such grace and such candor. And he says something really interesting. He says, most of the people who have death anxiety are those who live an unfulfilled life.
Yes.
So for a lot
Yes.
of people, they're waking up to deconstruction, they're going, fuck,
Yeah,
I've
I
never
followed
lived.
all the steps. I did all
I've
the
never
things.
lived my life. I have
Yeah.
never lived my true identity. And I remember going out like, oh well, this is new age stuff. This is this and that. And it's like, no, this is people waking up to be who they really are to be. Like these are
Yeah.
people saying, hey, you know what? I can't live like this any longer. That
Yep.
takes one to wake up one morning and say, hey, you know what? I can't live like this any longer. That is the most courageous thing you can ever do with your entire life. Because
Absolutely.
how many people grow up in the church, stay in the church, never leave the church, they stay silent, they
Oh,
die
yeah.
never knowing who they are.
Yeah, and they're miserable. They die
Yeah,
miserable and afraid. And I've seen it so many times where Christians are at the end of their life and they're terrified. They're
they are.
literally on their deathbed and they are terrified. They have served their Lord their entire life and now they're dying and they are terrified. Like,
I,
what did that get
yeah,
you? Terror,
nothing.
a
Yeah,
life being afraid. That's what your whole
yeah.
life was, is you lived your life afraid.
And I think, when we because I no longer live in hell. And I can just say without a doubt
Yeah.
there's no hell. But and it took me a long time to get here. But
Yeah.
I would think this I think the reason that hell's a big deal for evangelicals, it's not because it's not since there's the afterlife. It's just hell is used as a form of control.
Yes,
That's what it's used
absolutely.
for. So when you let go of hell, the whole world is wide open.
Yes.
When you no longer you're gonna be punished for how you live your life, the whole world is
You
open
can
to you.
literally become
But
whoever you want to become. You can do
whoever
whatever
you
it
want
is
to
that
be,
you want to do. And it's literally the fear of hell that holds you back. And
mm,
that's
it
really
is.
sad, you know?
Well, and I think the other thing we can get into is, the whole idea how evangelicals just how they define sin. We want to see sin as individual, but no, we can't see social sin, we can't see societal sin. No,
Yeah.
no, no, racial justice.
Nope.
That's not. No, that's not because my
We
heart. No,
never talk about those
I
sins. We're
no,
always
no,
too busy worried about the next horror movie that's coming out
right, right,
instead. Let's
right.
not worry about the stuff that's actually affecting and harming our neighbors. Let's just worry about a television program, you know?
But
Or a
Heather, I
book.
read,
Yeah.
I read, and I know some of the people who are still very evangelical, and a lot of great people. And I think that if the church could ever get healthy, they don't, and I don't, and honestly, I'll be honest with you, I think the evangelical church in America, I don't think you can save it at this point. I think it's just too far gone. But I think if we were ever to to raise people in the Christian faith, here's what I think you could do. Say, hey, you know what? I believe this is the way, but it may not be. You need to grow up and realize that's not for you. And the reason that kids deconstruct their faith in college isn't because they want to leave their faith. It's because you were told them what this narrow view of faith is, and they go to college and go, "Oh my gosh, I had a friend who's a Muslim. This guy's the most amazing guy I know. And you told me that he was, this and that, and that's not true." So reality hits, because all the things we're talking about, you know, they come to light, right? So I think that's another thing that's why people deconstruct their faith because you, the idea of faith is so narrow minded.
Just in closing, Will, if someone's listening and is beginning their own deconstruction and feels terrified or alone, what would you want them to hear from you today? What gives you hope right now?
I think the first thing I would say is you're not a mistake, you're not a screw up, you're not a failure. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not alone, and there's people there to support you. Because I tried so hard to hold on to that faith. I tried so hard to be the best Christian I could be. But what I realized in the end was 90% of it was all lies. And so for someone who's deconstructing, my hope was that you're able to truly discover who you are for the first time in your life. And that's good. It's not easy. It's isolating. It's lonely. It is
Yes.
hard. It is brutal. It is brutal.
So hard.
There will be nights you'll cry yourself to sleep. There will be nights, there will be things you're not invited to. There will be feeling that will shun you. But I think once you see what you haven't solved for, once you see what you couldn't see before, you can't go back. You don't want to go back. So
No.
as hard as it is, as hard as this journey is, you would not want to go back.
And
You
you are
can't go back.
worthy of the journey. You are worthy of being
And, and,
brave
and,
enough to
and
take that first step.
you are worthy of love and acceptance. If you out on this, if you don't hear anything else I say today, hear this. You are worthy of love and acceptance as you are,
Unconditional.
not as you are, unconditionally. And if Jesus is who he says he is, if there's a God, then he is going to love you as you are. Because when we take a twisted view of Scripture, and when you get to the idea of inerrancy, and the idea of inerrancy isn't really because people want to believe the Bible to be true. It's because they want to take the view of Scripture to beat someone else over the head with. So I believe the Bible to be inerrant, so I can't believe that gay people exist. No, 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 no. Gay people do exist. And I'll tell you what, not only exist, but there's no other people ever meet in their entire life. Trans people exist. I have trans I have trans people that have more faith to Jesus than many I knew in the evangelical world. So it, you are not a mistake. You have to, but it's something that I think, and this is one thing that really has made me say about the deconstruction movement is that while there are groups of people that are there to support people, a lot of people it's become a capitalistic thing where, oh, join that group and take $20 a month. It's like you need people who are just gonna walk with you authentically, right? So I think that's something
Mm,
that, you know, we have to like be able to walk people authentically where they are. And not all of
yes.
us have bandwidth for it, but like I love walking with people and traveling with them on this journey and helping them discover who they are for the first time in their entire life.
And how can I or others in our community hold space for people on this journey? What is something that you would give to Heather and I to be able to hold space for others that are coming in and just starting their journey, and for others in the community to make sure that we always hold space for each other?
I think the first thing is that if you're hearing someone's deconstructing journey, they already trust you because most people who are deconstructing never tell anyone.
Yeah.
And so I would say that there has to be a level of curiosity, a level of patience, you know,
Compassion,
allowing your,
empathy.
allowing yourself to have those 11 to young conversations with someone's independent mode because they're afraid of hell. Um, but I think the most important thing we can do, and this is something I'm still trying to find for myself, is really help people find community within deconstruction. Like,
Yes,
how do we
I
find our
agree.
people after we've lost our people, right? How do we find our people after the people who we thought were our closest friends and allies walked away from us because we were not the people they thought we were?
We wind up feeling in a place once we left of betrayal. And
Yeah.
it's really hard for us to reconnect with another group when the betrayal we feel is
Mhm.
so great.
It is. And, even me, like, I thought, well, I want to go to a progressive church, and I want to, go to a different church. And um, you know, I still go with my wife sometimes, but honestly, it's really the hardest to step foot in church. Like, it takes, if I'm gonna go to church on Sunday, it takes me preparing myself mentally
yes.
in the middle of the week. So I know it's gonna take everything out of me.
Oh, yeah.
Um, it's gonna take me like, I was at church this morning and they're talking about biblical manhood. And it's like, okay, I haven't been here in months. I come back and they talk about this. And it's always the culture. It's always being afraid of what's out there, you know?
Yes.
It's always being afraid of other people, of people who aren't like you. And
Yep.
it's just but I want to say this in closing. I want people to hear me on this. When I criticize evangelical church, and I do, and I won't stop, when I critique it, I am critiquing the system.
Yes.
I am not now people I knew I went to church with, people who I know, but I'm not sending people. And I don't think people understand how that works. A lot of times they say, well, why are you putting this down? I'm not putting you down. I'm putting this, I'm criticizing the system that puts people in these places because I
Hmm.
have a lot of love for people I grew up with. Like, I have some affection for people who I grew, and I don't blame them. I blame the system. I
Yes,
blame the
and there
system.
are good people that are
Good
victims of
people.
the system. Like they are
Yes.
victims of the system. I was one of them. So,
I was
it
one
would
of
be like
them.
me hating my former self, you know? And I'm not here to hate you before I even know you.
Right,
That's not what
right.
I'm
And
here
so,
for.
yeah, and I think like people are like, why are you so critical of yourself with church? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? It's like I'm not criticizing you. Like, I still love you. You get church. I don't. That's fine. I don't. All I ask is that you love other people. You love people. But I think the sad thing is that similar to faith now is going to tie to right wing politics that it's not even faith anymore. It's just it's a cult of personality. For
Yes.
example, I wonder what's that with the possibility, more likely the idea of snap being turned off in the rehearse, food stamps ending off in the rehearse. I wonder how many evangelical churches this morning said, hey, you know what? We're going to scrap our sermon. We're going to discuss how
No.
we can help our community today. None.
And I bet you
That's
there
it.
weren't many. There probably weren't
No.
many. And that's the sad part. And we know this. And that's the reality of what the church has become. They're more
Yeah,
about getting that tithe money, but they don't want to do the right things with it once it's in their hands.
yeah. I remember when we were going through some stuff with my daughter, it was so isolating for us because I was saying that a lot of evangelicals, they're great at meeting the felt needs, but they don't know how to meet emotional needs. So they're like, well, we did this for you, we did that for you, like that, but and those things are helpful. But when you're going through something hard, you need someone just to sit with you and say, hey, I'm just here. I'm
Yes.
here. You need coffee, you need dinner, I'm just here.
There are times when you really do just need that. You just need somebody to be present with
Yeah.
you in your struggle. You don't need them,
Mm-hmm.
giving you unsolicited advice or anything like that. You just need them to be present. But we're not
Mhm.
taught that in religious spaces, are we?
Absolutely.
And we are not taught that within each of our congregations. Within each of the congregations, we are split and divided into cliques, into
Yep.
hierarchies, into which group you fit
Uh-huh.
into and who participates with you or who interacts with you. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes that single mom sitting on the back pew with 3 babies is the one that's neglected because of the
Uh-huh.
sin that is in
Yep.
her life, because that's
Oh, yeah.
brought her
Yeah.
to where she is today. So instead of being empathetic and compassionate, in the very place that you go to seek community, it winds up harming you and hurting you even more because all you're trying to do is seek a community.
Absolutely.
And I will say, there have been some people in our life who've done that, quite a few between, but those people are rare. The people that really want to love you, walk beside you in this messy life, they're rare. But in all of this, not in essence, it's just if you're gonna love someone, the biggest thing I can never say is just show up. Just show up and be
Yep.
present. Show up and
Amen.
be who you are.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That is such a beautiful note to end on. Will, we are so grateful to have had you here with us today. You have been such an incredible guest, and your story is really incredible. I am so honored to have had you here with us today.
And I am thrilled as well. I'm
Yeah,
so
thank you so
glad
much.
to meet another Michigander. Hopefully,
And to all of our listeners
Go
that are out there,
Lions!
if
go
you guys
Lions.
go Lions, if you guys like this show, please hit that like
Go
and subscribe button and catch us back here again next week for another edition of The Awakening.
The preceding podcast is solely owned by its host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media LLC. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved.